I think it's quite special and important to have a chance to acknowledge Les and his multifaceted background and everything that he brings to this community of citizen scientists. So Les obtained his PhD from the University of Cape Town in mathematical statistics, but his career has been characterized by its interdisciplinary nature. Les has spent the past few decades working at the interface of statistical and biological sciences, applying his background and training to solving conservation challenges in the real world. He served as first a lecturer and then a professor within the Department of Statistical Sciences at UCT, and has continued research since his retirement as a senior research scholar, supervising multiple masters and PhD students, of whom I am one. And of course, many of us here know Les in his capacity as the director of the former Avian or Animal Demography Unit, the ADU, which is now the BDI. So earlier in his career in 1991, Les and a team of scientists had an incredible opportunity to spend time studying migratory waders in the Siberian Peninsula. And over the course of this talk and his next citizen scientist hour slot, Les is going to be sharing a bit about the research and the day-to-day realities of that experience. So Les, over to you.
Thanks, Coris. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Or can you? Yeah, great. So this is a 1991 trip. In 1989, Peter Prokosh, who's listening here tonight, gave a talk in Denmark of the first group of Westerners to get into Siberia. So it had been closed to Western science for many, many years, for decades. And somehow Peter and a chap called Herman Hotka managed to get in. And when I sat and listened, absolutely enthralled to Peter's presentation, I never, in my wildest dreams, dreamt that I would be there myself 2 years later. So, Ron Summers, closest to me, and Robert Priest-Jones, they developed this wild idea to actually get to the Tundra themselves, and they dragged me along with them. So this is the cargo aircraft that took us from Moscow to Khatanga. So there's the plane unloading at Khatanga Airport. So you must remember, this is 1991. This is a long time ago. There were no cell phones. There were no GPS units. There were no digital cameras. So these are all slides which have been scanned. So everything looks like it kind of comes out of the dark ages. So I'm actually quite amazed to look at all this stuff again, compare it with the technology we take for granted these days. So this plane that took us to Khatanga with the polar bear and the penguins on it was part of the polar flight of polar section of Aeroflot, Russian airline. So this is pi, a P, O, this is lambda, and L, and an A, and the thing that looks to us like a P is actually an R. So a little bit of mathematics actually helps you to decipher the Cyrillic script. So this is the flight we've done, Moscow to Khatanga in that cargo plane, 3,400 kilometers. There were 2 stops along the way to refuel. And then we waited in Khatanga for quite a few days for a helicopter. Our turn to go out into the Tundra, and we flew from Khatanga to Lake Pronchishcheva with a yellow arrow, and that was 500 kilometers by helicopter. So that's a long way to fly with a helicopter. And we were only sort of the distance between Cape Town and Johannesburg from the North Pole. So we stayed in this week in Hotel Aeroflot in Khatanga. So we were there in the thaw. The thaw is the most awful time in these towns in the north of the old Soviet Union. Mud and slush everywhere. So from the town, particularly at night, because we never knew when our chopper was going to come for us during the night. It was just 24 hours of daylight. We could walk out into the countryside, and we could walk out into the forest tundra ecotone, where the great coniferous forests kind of fade out and the forest starts. So that's where Tundra is. It was a fascinating place. So we're 72 degrees north, as it says on the side of the building on the top left. And if you want to know how you build buildings in the permafrost, this is how you do it, with piles. And those piles are let into the permafrost not by banging on them and pushing them down. They're let into the permafrost with boiling water. It's an amazing system. So this is real, I'm not going to call it culture shock, but it's really, really totally different to anything you can possibly experience on the continent of Africa. So walking out of alongside the Tundra River, these astonishing ice formations were blown up by the wind on the frosty river, and we had lots of mist as well. So finally, our day came for our helicopter to take us out to the tundra. An enormous amount of stuff was packed into this helicopter. I really was quite worried about whether it would actually take off or not. We took a whole bunch of men to actually close the doors at the back and push everything in. And then about 14 or 15 of us got on board as well. So it was a really, really full helicopter. So I was very grateful when it took off and left Tundra behind. And there you can see the still frozen Tundra River. So the picture bottom right is the place where we refueled, which is still a lot less advanced in terms of the thaw. So there's taking off again from Tundra, this enormous runway. So this was part of the Soviet protection system against an invasion from America, which is just over the North Pole. It's amazingly close from this spot to America. As you got north, we now passing over this forest tundra ecotone. The thaw is not as advanced as it was in Tundra. Incredibly beautiful countryside, totally different to anything I'd ever seen in my life before. So that's a lake which is just unfrozen along the edges. And then we flew further north and it started to look like this. And where on earth are we going to be setting up water studies in countryside like this? And then we went still further north and it looked like this. And then ultimately we landed on a little snow-free patch. So this is not snow that's melted. This is snow where the wind has actually blown the patch to be snow-free. So we unpacked this overfull helicopter, and I think this is Robert Priest Jones's photo. He was watching it from this point of view, and I was lying in that pile of luggage, and that was the helicopter from my perspective. And the next thing in my diary was the helicopter coming to fetch me in about 6 weeks' time, and the sun would not set in the intervening period, continuous daylight. So we set up camp. So there was absolutely nothing at this point. Everything had come in with us. So those tents were actually amazing and amazingly comfortable and warm. So behind the tents is Lake Pronchishcheva, which kind of half thawed by the time I left. This was our first meal together as a team. It's Robert and Ron on the left, and the rest were what in those days were Soviet colleagues rather than Russian colleagues. And that table was assembled in camp. So Zhenya, who was our leader, and his team, they walked around the Tundra at night, pinching timber off the building sites, and that all came with us, and we had no idea why. It was to build things like the table from scratch. So next week is the science part. An important part of the science part with these little animals, the lemmings. So we arrived in a really, really peak lemming year, 1991, most amazing number of lemmings everywhere. And this is in the start of the thaw, and there are lemmings moving about. So lemmings don't have these mythical migrations where they fall over the edge of cliffs. What is happening is that as the snow melts, they have to find new places to live. And I'll talk a bit more about that next time. So somebody caught me a lemming to hold in the proper bird ringer's grip. He knows 30 years ago my beard was a slightly different shade to what it is now, but it was certainly going white already then. So once we were settled, we went in search of nests of the waders that we had said goodbye to from Langebaan Lagoon about 6 weeks earlier. So the period where it's okay to breed is so short that the birds have to lay their eggs in these snow-free patches. Snow-free not because of thaw, but because the wind has blown them snow-free. So we were fairly successful in finding nests in conditions like these. So by the time the eggs hatch, the food abundance is at its peak for the chicks. If you start to breed when it starts to look sensible to breed, then you miss the food supply. So I was told that that this river would come down in flood fairly soon. So when we got there, there was no water. There was no water whatsoever. So all the drinking water was made by heating up ice to turn it into water. And then the thaw got going, and that river started to flow like this. And this was a river that we had to cross to get to our field work. Incredibly difficult and dangerous to cross it because it's ice at the bottom, and that ice is melting. And if you're not careful, you go straight through to the bottom and get yourself full of frozen water. And then the thaw reached this point where it was more or less a river in full spate. And by the time, so we had water to drink as opposed to snow that had to be melted. But by the time I left, one of the worries that Zhenya had was water at all, because this river had actually almost dried up. It was not flowing anymore at all. So once the thaw got going, and the water started running over Lake Pronchishcheva, these holes formed in the ice, and the fishermen in the team could go out on the ice with their lines, and they could catch these Arctic char and hang them up on this line. And if you had an attack of the nibbles, you could help yourself to an Arctic char, a bit like, from a South African perspective, a bit like biltong, dried fish, and they were absolutely delicious. So this was stuff that was just amazing to me. So you can see in the top second picture from the top left, you can see the camp in the background. So this picture was taken at about 2 o'clock in the morning, in the sort of when the sun is at its lowest. This is what the countryside looked like in the thaw. So for somebody who had never been in the tundra before, this was just gobsmackingly amazing. And within a week of this picture being taken, this area was bright green. It changed from khaki to green in next to no time. Can you see the knot on its nest? So there it is. There's the bill, the eye, and there's the back. Camouflage is just absolutely amazing. And so this is what the breeding plumage, which when the birds leave Langebaan, looks so amazingly conspicuous. This is what it looks like when the birds are on the nest. Okay, so there's the bird there. So the tundra is absolutely beautiful beyond description. As the detail of the plants and the lichen and the little flowers. There's a grey plover nest in the right foreground. So the grey plover is bred on these kind of moraine hills, uplands, always a little lake in them somewhere. And that was sort of favourite grey plover breeding site. And once again, you see this just amazingly beautiful countryside. Here's the nests close up. The plants right next to the nest grew better than the plants further away because the warmth that came from the bird during the incubation. So there were not many birds that I didn't actually know from, not many waders that I didn't know from Langebaan Lagoon, but this one was new to me. It's a golden plover. Ptarmigan. So this is ptarmigan on its nest. And if you look at the pattern on the back, you see, gosh, that's the same pattern that was on the back of the knot incubating. So you can see just how a few more paces back, and that bird will just merge into the background. So the way you find a ptarmigan nest is you find it by getting a huge fright, because the bird just jumps up from under your feet. So there's a ptarmigan on the left and a little stint on the right, and you can see the color of the back pattern is identical in both birds. So this is a ptarmigan in the transition from winter plumage to summer plumage. Winter plumage is white, summer plumage is this camouflage color. So there's a male ptarmigan in winter plumage sticking out like a sore thumb, and there it is on ploughing through the ice for reasons that I have no idea, and camouflaged. We saw quite a few birds that I really wouldn't have known. This is Ross's gull. This was a vagrant. It was some hundreds of kilometers out of its normal range. A really, really attractive gull. Long-tailed skua was a common nester in the tundra. So my mother was a cake decorator, and one of the things that she put onto cakes made out of little dots of icing were these forget-me-nots. So these were forget-me-nots in the tundra. So they transported me back all the way to my childhood. So ultimately, your clothes get dirty. Some days were actually warm enough just to be in shirt sleeves. And this is a product which is called cold water Oma, and this was the best advert that cold water Oma could ever get for their product. So we had to wash ourselves, sometimes two, and this guy Artem, he was an amazing Arctic man. He knew how to keep himself safe, and how to keep us safe in the tundra. So the way to get water to splash with inside that tent, which was inside a tent, there were 3 layers of tent that you got in, so you're quite well insulated, and milk urn with a blowtorch playing on it to turn the snow into water to wash. And that tent was set up on moraine as opposed to mud, so that you could just splash and the water would run down into the moraine. Real great spot and a great experience when you were in a cold environment like that, to have unlimited or fairly unlimited supplies of hot water. So you can see a bit of smoke coming out of the top of that tent, and each tent had a heater in it, and we were, considering how cold it was, we were very comfortably warm. So all the newspaper belonged to a botanist, and she used the newspaper to dry newspaper to press the plants. So ultimately, we ran out of bread, and there's Artem. He didn't really know how to make bread, so he experimented with various recipes, and eventually, after multiple failures, he got it right. And Yara's Ron saluting with one of Artem's failures. I don't know why they did that, but that's what we did anyhow. It was lots of fun. So in the center of that steel ring, that's called a luchok. That's the standard way of catching birds in the tundra. Waders is the Curlew Sandpiper nest with 4 eggs in it, and we caught the birds. This is a turnstone. You can see this is the 8th of July 1991 at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's nest LU20, so it's the 20th nest, and I had to take 2 attempts to get the ring number right. And so there's a photo like this of every bird caught at every nest. It's a Curlew Sandpiper in beautiful breeding plumage. That's the 10th of July 1991, and it's at 7:30 in the morning. So tonight's talk is basically just the fun part, the traveling. The next talk is going to be more about the science, and the science is really an interplay between this animal, the Arctic fox, and the lemming, and their impact of this interplay on the breeding success or breeding failure of all the waders that breed there. Well, snowy owls, brent geese, all the ground nesting birds, and all the birds are ground nesting. And we'll see next time that the lemming cycles in the tundra, which is what this is ultimately all about, are visible as far away as the southern tip of Africa. And as Graham talked about climate change in his talk, this was 30 years ago. The pattern that we were studying then is no longer as pronounced now because of the way the climate change is impacting, particularly the permafrost in these regions. So this is the ptarmigan after its eggs have hatched. Ptarmigans just leave the broken eggshells in the nest cup. The waders remove the eggshells. And here's a baby ptarmigan, young ptarmigan, under the lamppost. This is golden plover, absolutely spectacularly beautiful bird. This is a grey plover chick that's just hatched. It's down, it's still wet. And there's the next egg to hatch, which has been pipped. The beak is busy breaking its way out. And the amazing thing is how was a chick that size packed into an egg that small a few hours earlier? This chick has had no time to grow, so that was all packed inside that egg. Gosh, I think these are Curlew Sandpiper chicks, or somebody might like to correct me. And you can see just how beautiful the countryside is that these birds are breeding in. Pierre Izu sent me that photo. That's it's not a wind turbine. That's the back of the helicopter. The guy on the right is our pilot, and that's Genya, blue top, Lena with her back to the camera, and myself with beard having grown for months, a couple of months, looking like Father Christmas. And this was saying goodbye and leaving to go back home after what had been the most amazingly memorable experience of my life. So this actually, I think, changed the trajectory of my career. I stopped being a statistician who sat in an office waiting for people to bring him data, to being somebody who actually went out in the field and collected data himself. Far more fun being a biologist than being a statistician. So these are some of the people that I need to thank. Ron Summers and Robert Priest-Jones, who turned this idea of a trip to the expedition to the Tundra into a reality. So this was still in dark days, this end of the world, and I'm deeply grateful to Gerard Boere, who persuaded the Soviets to give me a visa. I had to go to London to collect the visa. Genya and Lena, who led the expedition, and their team were just amazing, and they shared their Arctic skills with us, and it's not easy keeping yourself safe in the tundra, and they were amazingly good at helping us do that. Brian Inkpen scanned the slides for me, and I'm deeply grateful to my dad who taught me how to find nests on Wonderbush Common. And it's exactly the same skills we needed to find nests in the tundra. So I'm hugely grateful to him. Jenya's father led this great Arctic expedition, as it was called, to go ahead in what was at that time an incredibly risky political climate. So I got out of the Soviet Union, and very soon after that was the great upheaval in Moscow, where it was, I can't remember but the exact details, but it was a really, really difficult time. So we end this whole story on a happy note. So there was lots and lots of fun in camp. So I'm happy to try and answer any questions, and I'll talk more about the science on Tuesday next week. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Les. See if any questions come in. I saw that there was one question from Julia asking if there was a stove in all of that luggage.
Was there a stove? Yes, there was a kitchen stove. So this is 1991 in the Soviet Union. Incredibly difficult times, and and you couldn't drive anything to Gattinga. It all had to go in by air. So I imagine that Zhenya somehow or other had to purchase a kitchen stove in Gattinga in the time between we arrived and we left in the helicopter. And what is even more amazing is that when the helicopter flew away, they realized that the stove had been upside down in the helicopter. And this helicopter was flying 4, 5, 6 hours with the flame spreaders at the top of the gas. Those were flying back to Gattinga with the helicopter. And what these Russians did was they just fashioned it out of pieces of tin, and they made the stove work. And that was stuff that I would just we would call a catastrophe. But these guys had the skills and the experience to overcome problems like that.
Great. I think Jonathan has his hand up. Did you have a question, Jonathan?
Yes, my question was, you said you practiced in Rondebosch Common before. Which bird species helped you to find nests in the tundra? Because I guess you don't have so many ground breeding birds in Rondebosch Common.
So the birds on Rondebosch Common were pipits and Cape Longclaws. And those were quite hard birds to find. The species on the tundra, gosh, it was sanderling, red knot, curlew sandpiper, grey plover. Was it lesser golden plover? So those were the main tundra species, and then it was also really hard to find nests of the skewers. So you had to go a long way back to get the skewer to go back onto the nest. So those the systems that I used were exactly the systems that my dad had taught me when I was a teenager to find nests.
I see there's a lot about Homo. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that my turn?
Yeah, go for it.
I'd like to share a couple of anecdotes that Les might remember. One was that you mentioned that the helicopter was packed with a load of rough cut wood, and they made their various bits of furniture when they arrived in the tundra, like beds, and of course the kitchen table. Now, hygiene in the Arctic was not that good, and eventually this rough cut wood got all sorts of bits of food stuck in it. So the Russians had their ingenious way of cleaning this. And what they did was they got a blow lamp and just burned it all off and used a plane to then just kind of smooth it all down again. Quite ingenious.
Yeah.
The other anecdote I've got is about the naming of the rivers.
Oh, yeah.
So the lake, of course, was named on the maps as Lake Pronchishcheva. And the only other name on the map was the name of a river coming into it. And it was called the Plocha, which meant the bad river. Now, our camp was actually set up on the next river along. And because it was where we got our water supply, we called that the Good River. Now, as we eventually expanded our study area, searching for nests, a third river was encompassed in our study area. So given that we had the good and the bad, the obvious choice was the ugly river. So we had to explain that to the Russians, who had probably not seen the Clint Eastwood movies. Anyway, these names were published in the IBIS paper, and given that these were published, I think these have now been adopted by the Russian Geographical Society as the names for these rivers running into the lake. That's it.
Yeah. So that final picture of the the khaki tundra. That was the ugly river that was in that picture.
There was one more question in the chat for you, Les, from Laban, asking, so this was before your interest had changed from statistics to biology, so what inspired your travel to Siberia?
Yeah, I think Ron and Robert are the people who know the answer to that question best. And I think you guys went to Moscow to try and arrange the trip, but you had to offer them some bait that that nobody else could offer. So the bait you offered was me, and a trip back to South Africa to see Longabon Lagoon, because put it bluntly, for the Russians, Britain wasn't very interesting because A, they'd been before, and B, because their birds didn't go there. So they wanted to see Longabon Lagoon, which was the place where the birds actually went in the non-breeding season. So I think Robert, I've more or less got that part of the story right.
Yes, you're right, Les, in that Robert and I went a year before the expedition, and we went there for a week, and that was to negotiate with Eugene's father and mother on how we were going to, smooth the waters in terms of getting there. So it was, you think a week was an awful long time, but everything had to be translated. And we sat in the library of the institute there with all the colleagues that were in the organization there. So Robert and I chatted over the possibilities, and as Les indicated, it was all came to a good outcome in terms of the expedition the following year. One of the things we had to deal with was the time of, it was an election time in '91, and that was the time when Boris Yeltsin was coming to the fore, and that was one of the reasons why we were stuck at Katanga for such a long time, because the helicopters were being used to ferry ballot papers across the tundra.
Yeah, I was deeply grateful, I think, in the long run. It was so frustrating spending all that time in Katanga, but when we got out to Pronchishcheva, it was still 90% snow cover. If we'd arrived, there as soon as we had arrived gone on from Katanga, we would have had another week of real cold before we could actually start doing any field work. So this is well, we actually stayed in Tundra and explored that area for a few days.